He was a hero and came back much more powerful to save the world. Manhwa begins to show us a large explosion in the final dungeon that causes everything to collapse, and every prisoner in the place starts to fight for freedom. At that moment, we see a mysterious boy fighting. It seems there is a rebellion underway for each prisoner to escape. And this is the beginning of an impressive story that we see our protagonists telling the prisoners. They will end up dead if they stop for just a second. We can see something like demons fighting our protagonists to regain control of the dungeon, and we witness the dungeon master ordering all the filthy pipes that destroyed his sanctuary in a scene. Shifting, we see our protagonist and someone who appears to be a prisoner acknowledging they are outnumbered and would be captured. We observe an explosion revealing what seems to be a superhuman behind the prisoners, with our protagonist named Munich, expressing a desire for his story to be told, indicating he remains to fight against everyone to save his friends from death. Moving to Ness, we can now see the real world, where it seems they believe they are the only ones on Earth at that moment. We witness a hooded man crashing into the human bank. When the human turns to complain about why the guy approached him like that, we see how it unfolds. The mysterious man appears to be a demon, and we discover that these underworld people had made a deal to enter Earth at that moment. We see how this underworld guy reveals he is in the middle of the city, marking the beginning of the Earth's invasion by these underworld demons. They started spreading in the real world, and it was imminent. However, humanity retaliates. Even with the most powerful weapon, they couldn't harm the demons due to their mystical power immunizing them against any attack, even escaping the army's attempts to stop them. The situation starts to change as these mystical powers begin to affect humans, transforming them into superhumans with new mystical powers. We witness humans starting to combat this underworld civilization once they realize they possess these powers. They also get rid of all apparent underground dungeons. At that moment, humanity had new hopes and ultimately managed to pass through the final door of the dungeon. In spring 2005, the 7 most powerful superhumans gathered to attack the last dungeon, which seemed to be a base of underground human civilization. When they liberated everything, they ended the war between worlds through this feat. They were called the Sephiros, who saved humanity. They were honored with money, glory, and respect. Unfortunately, one person could not return from the underground battle, leading to a ceremony in honor of Kamunki. He was the leader of the 7 superhumans, and the only one not able to return and receive everything. Despite winning the war, we see how humans create a giant statue of Louis Pourpre. His honor and sacrifice, the heroes who returned became stars while the fallen hero became a legend in a new scene. We can see that 17 years have passed, a completely changed world. We can see an ongoing tournament between South Korea and France, observing how France begins to attack. Our team could appropriately counterattack at that moment. We witness a player named Nathan Bernard, who had dealt with our players ruthlessly. Then we see Nathan having to claim his kills all by himself, showing he is a very strong superhuman. People started to wonder if they had a player like him since the beginning of the Battlefield League, and tournament announcers mentioned Nathan's performance was as expected, given his top 3 ranking of all time in the tournament history, causing concern among everyone. The national team would be eliminated without the chance to retaliate and enter. At that moment, we witness that the sole remaining player is a girl named Beck Kane, who knows it's a battle with little or no chance of winning, yet she confronts Nathan. We see her using her special ability called the Whip to attack Nathan face to face, leaving the crowd speechless at her strength. We see that she is one of the legendary. This battlefield, those who saved humanity, but Nathan says she wouldn't be able to defeat him with a team like that. We see him cut Beck Hen in half with a single blow. A girl of the 7 heroes is completely dead. South Korea suffers a massive defeat against Russia, and we see how the national team couldn't defeat Nathan, who managed to secure 7 kills in the second half and end the match South Korea vs France with a score of 0. At that moment, we see the crowd very disappointed, calling it a horrible disaster, expressing how Korea used to have great heroes who destroyed many dungeons during the war against the underworld era, but they couldn't keep up, which was a pity. A country that gave birth to heroes who saved the world, Coleman and Big Joe. Nonetheless, the struggle ends in a total defeat against France. Commentators say France has a very strong. But it was a very sad battle, and the Koreans are probably very disappointed now. We can see how many spectators are so upset by the defeat, witnessing the entire national disappointment over this loss. Now, we can see that Big Joe was the coach of the national team, stating it's the third defeat since he became the captain, acknowledging the public's sentiment, and saying only one was worth it, and everyone else was a nadir character. The Korean superhumans were famous for being courageous and strong, but that was a thing of the past. Now, we see the captain leaving the place, stating that all promising heroes are dead or gone. Long ago, we see him discouraged, looking at the sky, saying it would be great if you were still alive at that moment. His assistant calls him, saying he must be at the conference and he wants to go apologize to the public. We can see how disappointed he is. Regarding the performance, he will resign from his position as team coach, as it's the only way for him to stay. Considering 6 million coming back to life somehow, he says it's better to resign now before damaging his reputation, but his assistant says there would be no hope for the team if he resigns. See how the association president calls the coach, saying someone fell from the sky or the statues of heroes were that he wore armor, and that person is the same from 17 years ago, the one who saved 6 of the 7 heroes and sacrificed himself to save the world at that moment. We can see how Mundi came back from the dead at that moment. What can we see? It really happened with communes fighting against the demons of the underworld, and we can see the gates of the underworld closing and letting us know that Xiao Mun has been fighting for 17 years. So, no demon can resurface from it at that moment. We can hear Commander in Tulay, the remaining demon, stating it's a fight to the death, and that the strongest would be the only who survives at that moment. We can see how Coleman wakes up in what seems to be a hospital where he was recovering, and we can see a nurse saying he has finally woken up, asking where he is. The nurse and I say he is okay and that he's in the hospital. Xiao Mundi was shocked at that moment. When he realizes it's the year 2022 and not 2005, he understands that 17 years have passed but says it makes no sense since it was in 2005 when he entered the final dungeon, the nurse says. It is difficult to explain the situation and asks him to watch the television where the news was saying that the municipal leader of the 7 heroes, believed to be dead, had returned after 17 years and was being treated at the Central Hospital of Korea. It was also said that Mr. Xiao Munyan fell from the sky to Gwangman. He was found in front of his own statue unconscious, but his life is not at risk. He only had minor injuries and was wearing the same equipment he used in 2005 when he entered the dungeon, and he could be a superhuman since he looks the same as he hasn't changed in 17 years. In a different scene we can see a group of scientists discussing that it could be possible. Thanks to a distortion in time and space at that moment, the news ended Eco Mundo Mansi. In reality, 17 years had passed, and on his side just a few days ago it was 2005, the nurse said that was indeed the case, and that's why there are so many people outside the hospital after he was taken to the hospital. Journalists camped outside. Komun asks the nurse for a mirror. He realizes he hasn't aged at all and there's no way he could look like his 47 years, so he starts wondering if this distortion between time and space could be real since he hasn't seen it. Like Sakuman asking about his fortune, and we see that everything had been given to the protection of Childhood Foundation, and his house is now a museum. His brand new car sold at auction for charity at that moment. Mundi realizes he is poor and can't live in a hospital but has no home. He was sad, thinking he should have saved money just in case. The nurse said he's a hero who saved the world, and if he truly believes people will abandon him, she said Mr. Bakaya heard the news and contacted them to say they would come to see him. Then the nurse said she must leave and if he needs anything, ring the bell, and she would come to see him. Coleman still can't believe what's happening and asked Gio for details, and the first what he should do is check his body at that moment. We can see how he activates his powers. Begin to analyze himself since it was the first power that made him the strongest superhuman in the world. His eyes not only grasp other powers but can also enhance his abilities in the future. This is why he was able to grow faster than others. And that's why he became their leader. The dungeon incursion requires courage, so we can see that Kumin was the one who helped Jahua to become a very good superhuman, since with his powers he could see all the potential he had. So he took him as a student. He said that if he died following him, it wouldn't be his problem with which he would have been raised. His eyes, he saw he had a will of 110, and he questioned that because the limit. Was it time for humans? Then he realized at that moment that he had a new power, immortality. He was immunized to death for physical causes by the hour he gained when he defeated the final boss in the final door. At that moment, we can see Geo enter, and Sohomon asks if he has become weaker, and Joe starts crying. Laugh says he's a pacifist partner. Mundi mocks him because he saw him cry. Jiao says that when he grows up, he will cry more easily for anything then? Homo asked him if he kept the promise to tell his story, and Jiaodi that he contacted a ghost editor who was a fantasy author, and he wrote a book entitled Sway O Mundi the Wall Savior. Geo said there is even a documentary and a movie have been made as a mythological story, and this film has reached the. Kumin asks what he should do now because he thought he was suddenly dead. He appeared at the hospital 17 years later, and this new world was filled with so many things he didn't know about Zio Mundi that he's sure it wasn't an illusion, but still feels unreal, and even when he saved the world he is poor and homeless. So Geo takes his hand, saying that's what friends are for, and if he needed money she should simply ask Soshio Munzi, asking him if he had earned that money over the past 17 years. Then Joe said he had the money from the incursion. He made money in the underground war against the demons, but he didn't stop there. He invested the money and did more referencing. Mundi said with all that money, how could a business stay afloat? Being run by an idiot like him, Geo said it was hard to admit, but he left that job to a professional. So apparently, he is unemployed now, and Ezamount says he must do something about it, since he is coaching the national team at that moment. Jaho shows the tournament. His students fight since the queen is the same as the dungeons where they fought 17 years ago. Says it's a virtual reality game called Battlefunk. Mundi asks if what they are doing is right. Materialize a dungeon in virtual reality. He uses it as a field for two teams to face each other as a sport. Ong Jeo says it's a business to use superhumans, since after the war they became useless, but it's extremely popular since its creation, and it's the most well-known sport. And Eso Mundi that for him, it seems like a group of kids playing. Then Joe says it. Not like that, he says they are not comparable to the 7 heroes in the battlefield world. The cup is a matter of national pride of Nash. Socio Mundi demand. How is the national team? He says. He should rank high, but Geo says that in fact South Korea is among the last haters. See how Eso Mun get and his angry coffee here. That in a new scene, we see Eso Mun and Geodan. A talking car. When a great evil disappears, the next surpasses the old try. Why our nation is weak on the battlefield, and what came that when the war was over some superiors were afraid of the superhumans who had nowhere to go. They didn't know when the stable might turn against them or something, and that's why the battlefield is so strictly regulated by what it is. Believe that humans have a destructive power, and they tried to take control of the nation hedge. This is what happened to Geo, who tells Xiaoman that every superhuman who was considered strong at that time, they belonged to other nations, and they became either players or coaches, and Jeremy. That when he was there were people trying to use them in every possible way. He should have broken all knees at that moment, but Jaho said it's because of the way he talks to everyone about politics, to the president, and to Mundi that it's because of the way he tried to use them, so they are angry, jealous that their average level is low by what they had. A bad start. He tries to ask Kao Mundi if he wants to be a player, but he gets up and says no, Shao wants to live like a superhuman anymore, that this life is over. Heroically in this last dungeon, Jiao says that in battlefield, one does not fight with a sense of duty and just a sport, and the Shao Mundi that he never had a sense of duty, that he fought for his survival and to be recognized once he became a superhuman. And he asks Geo if he doesn't think it's time now to live his life too. If he announces that he is coming back, the press will create false weight and everything will be hit against him. Yahoo asks him if he wasn't interested in being the best in the Mechamundino fight. He says he hated being a clown, so Jiho says he won't bother him with that anymore, and this homo sees a show on the street says that Korean superhumans have not completely failed, that they still have superhumans. Like that, they quickly show the show and say she is very sexy. Gio reveals that she is his daughter. She wasn't 6 years old, but then Gio reminds her that 17 years has passed and she is 23 years old now, and this homo tries to resolve this situation and says she is pretty and she looks the same, but Jahua tells her he can stop now and see Amundi apologize. In a change of scenery we can see they have arrived at their destination, which is Jeo's house, where they are welcomed by Jeo's wife, and Sumi, who greets Xiao Manetti that a lot of time has passed equal and good to see him, but he says that for him, it was just a week. That she tells a joke about how she became so old in a week, but Sohomun says that for him, it's really like that, and she looks the same. Suni tells Yahoo he has worked enough now, but he says it's nothing compared to his friends who were considered dead and came back to life. Xiao Mundi watches the couple talk, that it seems real now that he has truly returned to a peaceful world without dungeons or fighting, so he wonders what to do now. For the moment he says he has decided to spend time playing, and we see him lying on a couch eating fries while watching TV. He suddenly finds a show titled Stare to Hele. He is surprised by it airing again, and he wanted to know how it ended. He is happy and says that's the reason he came back to life. Gio passes before his eyes him while Xiao Mundi yells that there are enough fries now, and he will watch the whole series drama he missed since 2005. Jiho goes to see him and asks if he will really watch dramas all. So he answers yes. Why, I said he can live his life by himself, but there are many of them. People out there, and his journalists have been waiting for days, and they wouldn't leave before they saw him as angry and see that there are many, so he gives up. And telling Jiho to bring the journalists tomorrow, he wants them all in one place. Being left alone from now on. In a new scene, we see that Almon and Gio entered a news studio while they journalists were talking. They said they thought they could sit for me outside Xiao's house. They say that Xiao Mundi looks serene more than he thought so. Another said he heard that Xiao Mundi would destroy everything if there was something he doesn't like, and wonders if everything would end perfectly and the conference to start. The Zio Mundi ring that, as they can see, he has returned, and just like them, he is surprised by this situation, so he must be too. Gio feels relieved because he takes things slowly, more than usual, but then Eso Mundi that he is not grateful for the attention people have given to him. He tells them to ask for anything they want today and never pay attention to him again. Gio says, as I thought, a part of him hasn't changed. Then the series of questions begins. A journalist asks how he returned from the last dungeon. BSO Mundi that he doesn't know, and he doesn't have a more satisfying answer, so another asks if he has a memory over the past years. He said no, that for him 2005 was just a few days ago. Another asks if he has been in contact with another hero than Sylvain, that he was not close. Another journalist asks if he wants to recover his wealth, and Soho Mundi that he does not. Then a spicier journalist asks if he wants to become an active player in Battlefield, and Eso Mundino. The journalists ask why Eso Mundino has no motivation. The journalist asks if it is because he feels he has failed. He said the only thing missing was his hair, and him adds that he is not interested and does not find it amusing not to expect there to be a clown. Just for their amusement, the conference ends, and the Xiao Mundi hopes that all doubts have been cleared. He does not want to be bothered anymore. He bids farewell, but then a journalist with a pair of glasses says that a player named Gerald Walker spoke about him and said that the heroes were nothing and he couldn't even touch him, so he wanted to know what Xiao Mundi thinks about that. Omon looks interested and asks about this person. The journalist says that he is the star of the US Battlefield, which they call the pride of American tanks. If Gerald Walker is the strongest player, and the journalist says there are 3 spots for the top players, they are Nathan, Bernard from France, King Miller from Ireland, Daniel Monster from Germany, or Walker is not among them even though he is very good, so Xiaomi indicates if he cannot be among the top 3, Then he cannot say if he wants to fight him, then he can look for him in real life as he buried near his garden with his hands while giving his middle finger. In a new scene we can see two people watching the transmission Monday. One of them is Zachary Wood, a manager of one of the players of the U.S. battlefield. Showing it to Gerald Walker, who crushes a remote with his hands just to hear that it is said to O2. Prepare a plane for Korea. Right now in a new scene, we can see that Geo is informed about an unofficial international match between countries with their national teams. Against the United States, Kowloon complains about the noise of Geo and asks what is going on. There was to explain the situation and says they will have a match in 2 weeks. That Almond didn't care. But Jiho says it's his fault for responding to Gerald Walker that Homo doesn't even remember who he was. Geo must remember him. Then he says he apparently got angry after being humiliated in public by the bailiff Almond Lapel, a winner, and Geo explains that Gerald is very sensitive on the issue of not being in the top 3. He wants to fight him, but as he is not in the battlefield, he wants to do with the South Korean team instead of the job. Asks what that must do with him. He wishes good luck to Jae-il, and he will be lazy for him at that time. Kumin reflects about the match and asks if Having will be there too. Then in a new scene, we see Having arrived. Her mother says she arrived sooner than she thought, that she says she rushed after hearing her uncle was there too. She wanted to see her parents. Having asked where her uncle is, and her mother says he's watching TV in the living room. When she sees him, she goes out and attacks him. Xiao Mao tells her that she has grown up now and she almost kills him. He says he was worried about the possibility that she forgets him now, having said she couldn't forget him because he always played with her and she loved it when he brought her cookies or dried chocolates. Her parents never let her have this. Homo Mundiquel actually grew up, and that children grow up very fast. She reminds him that she is 23 years old now. That Monday asks if she came back for the match, but she says that the match is only her secondary mission, that she came to see him. Then she asks if it's true that he is not interested in battlefield, and who asks him if Geo made her ask that, and that he has no interest in things like that. She asks why she's having a temper tantrum, but the job doesn't fall into the trap. She says he has changed, but he says it's clear that those who have changed were feeling down. She said that she always used to listen to his favors, but he said that his favors were about to get candy only. Then she found something else, and she asked him to go with. She has a verified avatar in the association. He asks what it is. She explains to him that Almondrov. It's tedious and he wants to finish his TV series. But he agrees, hands pleading. That at Monday asks where his sound is going, and she says he will only find out if he comes with her. In a new scene we can see the South Korea Battlefield Association building where an official receives them, asks them follow him, and says that the verification of Having's avatar will begin. She put on the helmet and connected the simulation. She asks if Job is watching, and she wants a monster to start moving a little more. A huge werewolf appears in front of Elcomer, seems interested that they can do it as well as the official explains that it's a VR sport where it recreates dungeon monsters and players. That's why all beginners must go to the association and create an avatar. So Monday says it really looks real and he stays to see how good she is. The werewolf attacks the fillet, skillfully beheads it. Then the one in charge says that the synchronization rate with the avatar has been confirmed and she can disconnect now, and in this rushed VSO ask her how she did it. He says it wasn't bad for a 6-year-old girl, but there is still a huge road ahead of her, so she says why not try. He insists he doesn't want to compete in Battlefield, but she says she's not asking him to, she just wants him to test it because her father talked a lot about him to her, and she's curious to see how strong he is tooth person because he had already left by the time she was old enough to see him fight. And this Homo doesn't accept, saying he does it only because she asked. The officials say that normally they would measure his statistics before the avatar verification, but as he is not participating in a real game that he could do right away, as asked if he should just go into the one in charge. Says that if he enters as he is right now, his avatar would be empty-handed only with a hood. Wish for him to first get some weapons. Hungry, a few workers appear with them. He grabs them. They say they are very light for his size. The official says he holds battlefield Equipment that the player would normally use custom equipment, but this equipment is just for testing. But he offers him something else if he finds this equipment uncomfortable. But the Xiaomundi kill is correct. A spear is enough and he connects to the simulation. Xiaomundi opens his eyes. Hello. An official says he is in a virtual area now, a full copy of a real test area. Xiaomundi sees his hand and says it's quite similar to when you go through a dungeon door. A screen appears and the official says everything seems to be going well with the synchronization. Error between the avatar and the real body while having the claim in the background begins. Stretching asked anything they want to throw at him as they did with having could a monster. That looks like a giant stingray appears that at Mundi that he is called Salaban Messi Sankam. There is a slight difference from what he knows the Eichel official. It's true that it's the same monster but created from the information they have on the most Ford. The monster rushes towards Kowloon but he doesn't move and throws his spear in the air, saying he brought a spear for nothing as he breathes in his hand, making the monster disappear in one punch using only his finger, having and in shock is told that it's false. But Esselmundi they're making a scene for nothing. The official says that in fact the celibacy is not a difficult monster to face, but neither the one to defeat only with a finger social. Mundi asks to summon another, not this garbage, because he wants to try something. Kowloon thinks over the question and realizes it's not that different from real life and difficult. You could try this in this environment, so he tells the officials that even if it was them strongest variant they couldn't stretch to, those myriads can no longer be done about it. So a text of in English appears saying that if his title is the strongest superhuman, there is no way he could be satisfied with a sudden Salaban. All the holograms in the room turn red and the one in charge asks why everything is suddenly like this, and having asked what is happening, suddenly a bunch of eggs signs appear and the official says that someone is trying to connect with A. And now, we see Gerald Walker bursting into the training area with an Albert D1 shield, asking Kowloon if his invitation is still on foot. Kowloon doesn't answer and Gerald asks why he's speechless, and if he was afraid because he really didn't expect him to come. So he says he doesn't know if there are 7 or 8 euros, but he will prove that these things were just a triviality. He lunges at Xiaomu shouting to die. Gerald Gatang attacks with his halberd, but he realizes that Xiaomundi isn't there. He just hit the ground. Benzio Mundi appears behind Gerald and says it's impossible for him to be afraid that it was just them. Thinking about the quality of this test, we see Having and the one in charge watching this duel. When a door opens and we see Jiao's manager Gerald Walker, Emma Morris, and President 2. The association Clark Jaunty entering the room saying he shouldn't worry because everything arranged and everything had been told in advance, and he apologizes for the confusion. Then he asks Emma if that would be enough, and she says she appreciates his cooperation even when she knew it was a difficult request. There, says the president, Kokomo is indebted to him and that if he had a conscience, he wouldn't say anything, but he would say himself that he should be grateful because Coleman might be able to gain some interest in Battlefield. Back in the simulation, Xiaomundi and Gerald continue their fight. Iso Homundia himself that this guy is better than what he expected, and he uses his ability to check his statistics. And he discovers he has 100 points of strength and resistance with a will of 87 and admits he can support a little of his foolishness. Gerald asks why he stopped fighting, but Komin doesn't reply and says that if someone like that had existed in his time, he could have taken him to the final dungeon. Then he remembers he wanted to try the power he discovered when we woke up in the hospital, and he wanted to try it with the bachelor, but since he had this guy in front of him, he might as well try it on him. Coleman lunges at Gerald and stops in front of him so Gerald can hit him with his halberd and Xiaomundi that he will show him something interesting. Gerald hits Komundi, and it appears he is dead and people ask why. He stood still and acted to be hit and die. Gerald wonders the same thing as he stood still. As if he wanted to die suddenly, Xiuchuan says that it hurt more than he thought and throws his spear. Near Gerald he avoids by a millimeter. He says he should be dead since he didn't even do it. Defend himself, Komun seems to cough, asking if he also simulated the smoke. Everyone is shocked. When he sees that Kowloon is alive, he asks everyone how he behaved and what he said about them. he would show something interesting. Gerald wondered how it is possible that he is still alive. After being struck by this, Iselman reveals that he obtained a new superpower after being close to death. And he became immortal. So he says that the test was a success, and not only that. The power also healed the wound and said that it would not be a fair fight. Then he said to the only one in charge that for him who cheats, so he asks if they can block this power so that of in charge accepted, proceeds to block. Gerald asks him questions about the power, and whether it was at Monday that it was a new thing and he wanted to try it, but if it really worked inside the simulation then Gerald would blame the ability when he would lose, and that's why he wanted to block it. Gerald takes to throw the rank at Kumun to saying that it is true all about his arrogance, and wants to know if his abilities are also as rumors say. Monday saw and said that reality will be different from the rumors because he is stronger than he thinks he is then, and this causes. Gerald says why doesn't he beat the top 3 first since he's not among them? Before facing the final boss who is him, it wouldn't be a good story. Gerald gets angry and rushes towards Kowloon while he mocks him. Gerald realizes he has touched the ground again. An Esaman appears behind his back attacking him with the lance back. Gerald and Vidlu attack with his shield, and that Xiaomi thinks it's not bad, but it's time to end this then. He throws his lance which reaches Gerald, who targeted Gerald, lets us know that the lance turned just before making contact with the shield, and it's a terrifying control which was the true. Kumun, then our protagonist, says he won, but Gerald doesn't say yet the lance just grazed him. He's not dead yet, the Xiaomundi that he did it on purpose and that he could never win with. This shield as big as at least begins to give some advice which tells him to change the shield for a smaller one since his shield blocks his overall vision, asks why he does this in SEO. Monday that it's because he showed he wasn't just talk, then at least starts to analyze Gerald by saying that maybe when he was little, he was told he had narrow vision. He chose a large shield to defend himself while looking around him in the middle of the battle. But it's an incomplete solution, so people like Kumun can use his field of vision against Gerald. He asks if he's not lying, and the Xiaomundi, that even if he says he is not a match for him, then Gerald agrees to try while at the Geo observation room. Asks why. If Homundi said everything, if this was already causing enough problems that Homundi told Gerald to make sure and make a deposit for this lesson because justice taught him. Well, Gerald accepts, with a condition to fight again with him in the competition in 2 weeks, and this at Monday repeat that he is not interested because he has too many TV series to watch. But Gerald insisted, said he would pay him everything he wanted. That Homo refused and thinks Gerald has lost his mind. Gerald says his power should not be wasted inside a house. He uses his powers as he wanted so that everyone watches their conversation in the other room. The president laughs in a diabolical way, saying he could use that in a change of scenery. We see Komen watching TV series in Joe's house when suddenly the shows are interrupted by an emergency alert. Say that Kowloon might change his mind about the competition in Battlefield if the American team wins 11-0 against Korea, then he would participate in a friendly match between the two countries, and he accepted the social challenge. Monday reacted by insulting everyone and saying he never said anything like that. We see Almond arguing with the association president, asking when the hell did this happen and who was the anonymous source, and this Homo shows his conversation with Gerald and Hadi. That they edited all the parts where he refused. The president stands up and apologizes with a deep bow since these incidents have affected the one who saved the world. He says there was some pressure from people with power and support from the people, and a president as weak as he not to refuse this proposition, but he says not to worry about it, that he has a brilliant plan. Anxious to avoid any trouble for him, he said he agreed to a perfect score, and if he did not lose 0-11, he wouldn't have to be involved in all of this, but he doesn't. He's just not interested in Battlefield and asks why everyone bothers him with that. The president reassures him by saying it's almost an impossible condition, that's why he asks for his help. He says he will donate all the proceeds to child protection tries.